Hello and welcome, this is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to create some spring flowers and quirky vases cards using the new Spring Flowers Petals and Stems die set, as well as the Quirky Vases die set. I'm also going to throw in the nested labels and twisted rectangles dies, as well as the best wishes frames for backgrounds for my vases and flowers. So I did a bunch of die cutting off screen. I have the pieces for my cards already, and I'm using a combination of white cardstock, gray cardstock, and black cardstock. So the white cardstock that I like to use is just a thick white cardstock. Sometimes I'll use Hammermill Cardstock for die cuts themselves, but the thick stuff is for my background cards, my card bases. And the dark gray cardstock I'm using is just scraps that I have in my scrap bin. The black cardstock is some Onyx Cardstock. And then I have some greenery that I've die cut out of cardstock scraps for my greenery for my flowers. I did a little bit of ink blending on it with some Summer Garden Interference ink. So it's just going to darken the green, but when you tilt it into the light, it's going to give it a little bit of a blue shimmer because of that gorgeous interference ink. I have a bunch of vases here that I've die cut out of black cardstock. I have more vases than I'm really going to need, but I wanted to make sure that I had lots of selection. Any of the ones that I have left here, I'm just going to put them in a Ziploc bag. I'll store them with that die set, so anytime I bring that die set out to use, I will already have some vases die cut ready to go. And then any of the ones that I don't use for this video aren't going to be wasted. I think I said I die cut them out of black cardstock, but these ones are die cut out of dark gray cardstock. So the first set of vases I'm going to do 2 cards with clusters of 3 and then 1 card with just a single vase. So the first one, I'm using some black soot distress ink just to give it some shading around the edges, give it a little bit of visual dimension that way. And it's really easy to do this on the Tacky Mat. It holds the die cuts really, really well and makes sure that they stay in one place for me. I also have 2 little pieces here that are in this same die set, and it's just for a shadow underneath my dies or underneath my vases. I'm going to use those ones underneath the clusters of 3. So the one card that I do a single vase for, I'm not going to have a shadow underneath it. For the single vase, I'm just using the Hickory Smoke Distress Pad. This one's going to give some shading as well. It's just going to be not quite as dark as the black. So I can set that to the side. Now I want to add a little bit of interference color to these vases. So I'm using Regal Gray. This one has a gray dye ink to it, but the interference property is purple. So we're going to see a little bit of purple as well as the gray ink color to it. Now I want my 3 vases to be matching, but I want them to be a little bit different. So one of them I just did the interference ink around the outside edge. One I did the entire vase, and then the third one I did kind of an ombre. So I did the ink from the bottom and just went a little bit up. For my other cluster of vases, I'm using the Lisa Horton Silver Shine ink pad. This is one of her limited edition metallic ink pads. And once again, just like that first cluster, I'm doing 3 vases that coordinate with each other but look a little bit different. So one of them I just did it around the edges. The other one I did the entire vase. And then the third one, I kind of did it more heavily towards the bottom and then a little bit towards the upper edges. So when I cluster them together, they're going to coordinate with each other, but they are going to have a different look from each other. So they're not going to be 3 identical looking vases, just different shapes. Once I'm done with that, I can clean off my Tacky Mat. And I'm just using a microfiber cloth that is damp so that I can take all of the ink off. I want to make sure that when I go to ink my flowers that I have control over which inks are going to go over there. And if I leave some of those inks from the previous ink blending, then there's a chance that I'm going to contaminate something or get a color where I don't want it to go. So the white flower die cuts here are die cut out of just white Hammermill cardstock, and I'm going to use my interference inks to color them. I'm doing 3 different clusters of flowers because of the different clusters of vases. So I'm going to do one with some tulips here. I'm going to do a little bit of ink blending with the black soot distress ink before I put my interference inks on there. So I'm starting from the bottom up. I want to have some shading on the bottom For my next group of flowers, I'm using the Hickory Smoke Distress ink, and I'm using a detailed ink blending brush going in the center of the flower. And then when I get the excess of the ink off, I'm just kind of moving around. So it kind of has a dark center to it, but then kind of fades out or gets a little bit lighter. So I don't have a strong blob of ink in the center. It just kind of fades out a little bit. I did a couple of those flowers with some black in the center as well, just to give it a little bit of variety. And then my last set of flowers that kind of look like daisies, I am putting the black on the center, doing the same technique as the second group of flowers, making sure that that ink is nice and dark in the center, and then kind of circling my way out. As there's less and less ink on my brush, I'll get less and less ink on the die cut. For my first ink color here, I'm using Fruit Salad to color some of these flowers. And I'm just using an ink blending brush. This one's larger than what I really need for these flowers, but it works perfectly. And then I'm also doing one of the daisies and then a couple of the other group of flowers. Next, we have Tropical Paradise. I'm going to do one of the daisies with that. A couple of the other flowers. I want my cards to coordinate with each other, so I'm using the similar inks. I don't necessarily want them all to be exactly the same color. That last one there I used was Opal Blush. So that one is going to look blue, and then the centers of the flowers over top of the black or gray ink is going to have like a pinky purple interference. And you can see that right on this black die cut here, how the color that shows up on the Tacky Mat is blue, but what shows up on the die cut, on the black die cut, is more of a pink tone. Once that's done, I can set it to the side. And typically when I create cards, I will do kind of start to finish on each card, because I already have the pieces for my cards ready to go, as well as the fact that I have all my die cuts ready to go. I kind of thought I should just do all of my ink blending at once, then have them to the side, let them completely dry, and then do all of my card making at once. So it's kind of a little bit out of order. And it's going to make more sense once I start putting everything together. The hardest part about this is thinking about what colors you want to use and what colors make sense for the different layers, and thinking about 3 cards at once. But you definitely don't necessarily need to do it this way. This is just the way that kind of made sense to me when I was creating during the session, simply because I had everything die cut ready to go and had an idea where I wanted to go with it. This last one here is a die cut made out of that dark gray cardstock, and I ink blended it with that Fruit Salad ink, then set that aside to dry. Anytime I go between the different ink colors, I use that damp microfiber cloth just to make sure to clean off my Tacky Mat, to make sure I'm not getting any ink contamination from it. For this die cut here, this one's going to go with that group of vases that have the silver. So I'm using the Silver Shine, and I'm not completely making it solid silver around the edges. I'm just adding a little bit of that ink. I do want to see that black cardstock, but I also want to have that silver coordinating with it and blending with it. So I just did a little tiny bit around there. Now, if you wanted to have a bit more control over it, what you could do is use that die cut and then just use the edge of or rub the edge of the die cut on top of that silver ink pad. You'd have a little bit more of a solid area with that silver, and it would be a little bit thinner. Another good way to blend that in. This one here, this die cut is going to go with the vases that have the Regal gray on them. So I'm going to use that same ink for one of my mats for this card. And I'm not going all the way in because there's going to be a die cut on top of it. It's going to completely cover the center, but I do want to make sure to go in enough so that I don't have any black cardstock showing through. I have one more die cut here to ink, and I'm going to use that Opal Blush. So this one is the one that would show up blue if it was white cardstock, but because we're using black cardstock, it's going to have that pinky interference color to it. So with all of these done and ready to go, I can set them aside, clean off my Tacky Mat so it's clean to go next time, and I'm ready to start assembling my cards. And because I have all the pieces ready to go and inked already, my cards are going to come together really, really quickly. So I'm using some Barely Art glue in a fine line bottle for all of my die cuts. So it's going to work for the larger die cuts as well as the smaller ones, my little florals and my little greenery. It's going to work perfectly to blend all of that together. And you can see that I have a black die cut with the Regal Gray on it. And right on top of it, I'm going to put a black die cut that has the Opal Blush ink blended on it. And it still looks beautiful. They're going to be very similar in color to each other because one has a purple tone to it, one has a pink tone to it, but you're still going to be able to see it. Another option would be to not even ink blend that second one and just have a black die cut on top of the Regal Gray one and do your card that way. There's so many different ways to layer and blend and colors to choose here that really, you can't really go wrong with it. These background pieces here have such a unique shape to them that it gives a really interesting look to your card. And with these vases and these quirky flowers, the sky's the limit when it comes to creating with them, colors to use with them. You could use colored cardstocks. Here I'm only using a few colored cardstocks, but you could easily just use cardstock scraps and do your flowers and your greenery that way. I always love doing the ink blending on them simply because it gives it a little bit of visual dimension, but you don't necessarily need to. You can see how easy it is to use liquid glue for this because you have a little bit of wiggle room to shimmy things in place, and it just starts to grab really quickly, but it's really nice to have that wiggle room and to be able to move and shimmy things to get it exactly where you want. Once I have my greenery in place, I can start gluing the flowers on there. This is the card that I have flowers in different colors, so I'm trying to make sure that I don't have too many of the same colored flowers together. I kind of want to have them scattered, so it's kind of a random pattern around there. There will be some that are similar together or similar in color right beside each other, but I wanted to have kind of more colorful flowers here. And I think this would be gorgeous with some colored cardstock as well with those interference inks on there, because you could get the color from the cardstock, but the shimmer from those interference inks. So once again, the sky's the limit and you can really get fun and creative with it. Now in the die set, there are some centers to these flowers. I opted to not die cut those out. I like to use some stickles in the centers of the flowers. I'm using Stardust stickles here. It just has a opalescent look to it. It doesn't have any color to it, but it's going to give the centers of those flowers some texture as well as some sparkle. And then because I want one of those vases to kind of stand out a little bit, look a little bit different from the others, I'm using some glossy accents. So I will use glossy accents kind of like icing a cookie. I will kind of do a line around the entire area, and then it will flood it in so that the line around there kind of contains everything and it gives it a nice edge to it. The glossy accents will take longer to dry depending on how much you use. So an area like this will typically take fairly long to dry. So what I will do is I will do it and leave it till it's either completely dry or mostly dried, and then I'll just set it to the side. You do want to make sure that it's on a completely level surface though. If it's tilted in any way, when you first put that glossy accents down, it's fairly liquid, so it will run or tilt down to the lower area. So you want to be careful for it. You want to make sure that you have it nice and flat. I taught a class many years ago where someone didn't understand that about it, and they used the glossy accents on an area and then just stood their card right up so it ran down the entire front of the card. So you want to make sure to be very, very careful and only have your card while it's drying on a flat surface. And sometimes if I have a card that wants to open up a little bit and tilt a little bit, sometimes I'll put my acrylic block on the side that wants to open up so that it holds it down and keeps everything nice and flat. So I'm working on the second card here, layering the different layers here, and you can see with everything already done, already inked, how it comes together super, super quickly. This is the one, obviously, that has the silver vases to it, so I'll cluster them together. And I'm also going to use the glossy accents on the center vase of this one as well. I just really like the look of having one of the vases shiny and glossy from that glossy accents. It also gives it a little different texture from the other vases. You could put that glossy accents on all three of them if you wanted, but I think it looks a little bit more interesting having one of them different from the other, the one that's a little bit more forward. I just like the look of it. So I'm going to use different stems for this particular card. I divided my greenery stems to different ones that would work well with different flowers and try to use ones similar, like this one. These ones here are going to be for the tulips. So I tried to use all stems that would look somewhat similar. I say they're tulips. They may not really supposed to be, but to me they're they look like they are tulips. I'm going to put all of the stems down, and when I put glue down my vases, I put glue on the whole thing, but I didn't press the top of the vase down. I wanted there to be room for me to be able to lift up that top of the vase to tuck in the different stems there. And I'm also not pushing my stems down until I have all my pieces down. Then I'll put an acrylic block on there. That glue won't be completely dried, so there will still be time for that glue to glue down or adhere to the piece underneath it. But by not putting those pieces down or pressing those pieces down, I'm just giving myself a little bit of wiggle room if I want to tuck something somewhere. I have that glue down there, so once I'm done, ready to go, I can push it down. And because everything is all ready to go, I'm not taking so long that it's going to make anything completely dry before I'm ready for it to dry. I'm just putting any of these pieces where I want them to go. Once everything is glued down, I can easily just go put my acrylic block on there. It will push everything down and everything will finish gluing together. So I like to put these flowers so that they're kind of all tilted in different directions. Just looks a little bit more realistic looking. And for this card, I kept all my flowers the same color, but you could do similar to my last card and have a variety of different colors as well. Once again, like I said before, I'm using the glossy accents on this vase, just doing that line around the outside edge and then filling it all in. And glossy accents is something that the more you use, the longer it's going to take to dry. And because this is a large area, it's going to take quite a while to dry. But I love the look of it over the whole thing. Another option would be to do a pattern or just dots or something on a vase. I think that would make it look really interesting as well. Just gives it a little bit of extra different texture to it. So once that has dried mostly, I tuck it to the side so that it can continue to dry while I assemble my last card. And again, because everything is already inked, ready to go, it's going to come together very, very quickly. When it comes to these nested labels and twisted rectangles, as well as the Best Wishes frame die set, because we don't have any straight edges, in order to make sure everything is lined up and straight looking, I kind of center the die cut between the top and the bottom and then between the two sides, and make sure that the space on those pointy ends for the top and the bottom are even, as well as for the sides. So I try to make it look as straight as possible. It is a little bit more challenging with these shapes than, say, just regular squares or rectangles, but it's not completely impossible. And then those center pieces, because they're a completely different shape from the outside edges, I centered the center points for the top and the bottom, and then the center points from the side to the side. Same way or similar way to the outside shapes, just kind of making them even, which makes it fairly straight. For my vase, I'm putting that vase to the left-hand side. I wanted to make sure to have space for that Best Wishes die cut. And that Best Wishes was in that Best Wishes frames die set. Works perfectly with this. And I have that ink blended the same as my flowers, as well as one of my mats. So it's all going to coordinate together. I can put in those stems, and then I can simply add the flowers as well as my Best Wishes. Now, often with flowers like this, I like to use my fingers to curl the edges. Because these ones here have such tiny, narrow petals, I glued them completely flat because I didn't think, I thought it was going to look a little bit odd if I curled these petals. So I thought they would look a little bit better if they were totally flat, but that's also an option if you wanted to. Last step is to add the Best Wishes. And because of those interesting shapes for the mats, it does make it a little bit more challenging for putting these words on there, because it makes it a little bit more challenging to see which way is level. I tried my best to do it visually from or judging by the bottom of the card, but all of those angles do make it a little bit more challenging. You could use a T-ruler to ensure that they're on completely flat. I opted to just put it on and eyeball it, but that's an easy way to make sure that it's totally flat. Once again, I added some stickles to the centers of the flowers, and then I'm going to put some glossy accents on the vase, exactly the same way as the two other cards. Again, it's just going to add that different bit of texture and give a little bit of a focal point to the card. This Spring Flowers, Petals, and Stems die set has such a variety when it comes to the florals as well as the greenery that it makes it really easy to create a bunch of cards all at once. You can cut a bunch of different cardstock scraps and have a whole bunch of florals ready to go, and you've got a lot of variety to choose from. So here is that third card once it's completely dried, and you can see how glossy that vase is from that glossy accents. Then we have our second card here with those tulips, and once again I love the look, the different look between the different vases, between the different inking of each one of those vases, plus the glossy accents on there. It just makes them look a little bit more unique and a little bit more interesting. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the time that you spend with me, and I hope you have a fantastic day.